1.
Good morning and welcome to our Environmental Protection Commission meeting today. And I'll call this to order and ask Commissioner White to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and invocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you're able to, at this time I'll ask that you stand and join me for the pledge followed by the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the beautiful environment that you've given us here in the Tampa Bay area, the clean air that we breathe, clean water, our wetlands that filter out the water heading into Tampa Bay. I also thank you for the roofs over our head and agricultural industry that puts food on our table and industry that gives us the means to provide for these things. And I just hope, Lord, that you will help this board and staff and stakeholders to keep all of those things in the proper balance this morning as we make policy decisions. I also continue to pray for peace among the unrest that's going on around the country, and as always pray for members of our armed forces and our first responders, that you'll keep them safe, comfortable each and every day. I ask for all these blessings in your heavenly name. Amen.
Amen. And at this time, we'll take roll call attendance.
Good morning. Smith?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Myers?
Here.
White?
Here.
Hagan?
Here.
Kemp?
Here.
Overman?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. And Ms. Doherty, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, Commissioner, we do not.
All right. That brings us to public comment. And because we have a hearing later in the agenda, I'm going to read a little message that'll make a couple of things clear about public comment. In today's meeting, the Commission will conduct a final order proceeding to consider the recommended order in the permitting appeal between Manuel and Tammy Creolo versus Peter Johnson and EPC regarding the issuance of an access pier. This is not a public hearing that requires the Commission to open it up for public comment. If any party or member of the public does choose to discuss the case during the public comment portion of our morning agenda, they are not allowed to discuss new evidence or other information outside of the record. Your comments should merely be limited to what you support or oppose issuance of to whether you support or oppose issuance of the permit. If you begin to tread into new evidence, the Commission counsel will have to ask you to not discuss the new evidence. So with that limitation, the EPC will now allow members of the public to provide public comment on any matters on the EPC agenda or relevant to the EPC. And your comments should be limited to 3 minutes. So I do see that we have public comment, and let's see, first up is Charles. Let me first of all ask if Ms. Bartle, the EPC attorney online, if she has anything to add to that introductory comments that I made about public comment today.
Good morning, Commissioner. No, I have nothing further to add.
Oh, okay. I guess I did a good job. So our first speaker will be Charles Vickery. You have 3 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Vickery.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone is having a great day today. My name is Charles Vickery with the University of South Florida School of Geosciences, and I'm here today on behalf of a much larger group of students and faculty at USF across numerous departments at USF who are actually speaking out in opposition of a request for information that was recently issued by USF to solicit proposals to develop a 700-acre parcel of land known as the USF Forest Preserve, the USF Ecological Research Area, which is situated between Lettuce Lake Park and the USF Golf Course. So for those who maybe are not familiar with the Forest Preserve, about 550 of these 700 acres are designated as wetlands and therefore not buildable land. So that leaves about 150 acres of golf course land and 50 acres of upland sandhills within the preserve that can actually be developed. And to say that these remaining 50 acres of sandhills have a high ecological value would be a gross understatement. So the vast majority of our sandhill communities across the state of Florida have actually been lost or heavily fragmented as a result of urbanization. And for this reason, it's extremely important to conserve these remaining pockets that we do have left. So places like the USF Forest Preserve actually serve as critical strongholds for a number of threatened and endangered species that are actually endemic to these sandhill communities. So this would include gopher tortoises, eastern indigo snakes. There's 9 listed endangered plant species in the preserve. The wet birds that sort of refuel their journey across the Gulf of Mexico. But more importantly, the Forest Preserve is part of an ecological corridor that stretches all the way from urban Tampa to the Gulf. So developing this area would create a pinch point in an otherwise intact corridor. So naturally, this area has become a very integral component of many scientific research and education efforts at USF. We actually teach over 10 different STEM courses here. The preserve is also home to several recorded Native American archaeological sites that we personally feel USF has an obligation to protect. But natural and cultural resources aside, there are a number of valuable ecosystem services provided by the wetlands at the preserve. So this would include purifying water, regulating nutrients, improving air quality, and even reducing the risk of flooding. So when you take all of these factors into consideration, this really becomes a community concern, which is exactly why we're here today, to make sure that all of the stakeholders are aware of what's going on, aware of how this will affect the community, and aware of how this will potentially affect future generations as well. And finally, we would like to garner support for our movement. We have started a letter writing campaign targeting USF administration. We've contacted media outlets. We have circulated a petition, which now, as I'm speaking, has 12,274 signatures. And most recently, we have mobilized quite a sizable online movement as well.
I'm sorry, your time is up. Your time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate your comments. And we have, the next 3 speakers are related to the legal matter that we have later in the agenda. But I'm going to call your names and see if you, any of you want to speak at this public comment portion to any matter before the EPC. Manuel Criollo, do you wish to speak to the board at this time, or are you here for the later item?
I'll comment, and I'll be listening later.
Okay, and Tammy Creolo as well?
Yes.
And Mr. Reale?
I will hold comment. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, all right, thanks. Just to make clear. And that takes us to the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion to approve by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Myers. We'll have a roll call vote today because our meeting is a hybrid.
Smith,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Hagan,
Yes.
Kemp,
Yes.
Overman.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you. And that brings us to our regular agenda, Section 9, and the first item up is the appeal of the legal matter between Manuel and Tammy Creolo versus Petter Johnson and EPC, the final order proceeding. So at this time, we'll conduct a final order hearing in this matter in the dock appeal case. It is my understanding that, well, we've established that Mr. and Mrs. Creolo are appearing virtually via WebEx, and they are on the line with us and can hear us. Mr. Marotti, do you want to take it from here and give us an explanation?
Yeah, mine will be very limited because Ms. Bartle is going to explain it in a little more detail. But because I was one of the actual trial attorneys advocating for the EPC's permitting decision, that's why Ms. Bartle is going to be your counsel, who has been walled off from the case, so she can give you unbiased counsel as opposed to me, who's litigating in advocating for a position. So with that, she'll handle your legal questions. And if you have a question of me as a party litigant, I'll be available for questions, just like the Creolos and Mr. Reale, attorney for the applicant, are available for questions too. But none of us are presenting any oral argument today.
Thank you. So I'll ask our counsel, Ms. Bartle, to explain the process and give us a brief synopsis of the case. Ms. Bartle, you're recognized.
Thank you. I will be sharing my screen for a presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we see it and we hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. This is a unique hearing process wherein you will be sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity. Our last hearing like this was in mid-2015. As we do not do this frequently, I will remind you of the process. I will first begin with a brief overview of the facts, the proceedings which led up to this final order hearing, and the procedures utilized during this final order hearing. Lastly, if the commission desires, I will provide a recommendation. This appeal is of a Tampa Port Authority minor work permit. This appeal is of a Tampa Port Authority minor work permit issued by the EPC. The EPC received delegation to issue minor work permits on behalf of the port in 2009. The minor work permit authorizes the construction of a 4-foot wide, 19-foot long access pier to the former property owner, SJW Group LLC. Since entry of the recommended order, SJW Group has transferred the ownership to Petter Johnson, who has been substituted as a party to the administrative case. What is visible to you is Exhibit A2 from the minor work permit, which was included as an exhibit to the appellee's motion to dismiss and motion for summary order. On the left of this view is an overview of the permitted structure. The structure is permitted within the mangrove fringe and does not extend beyond the edges of the mangroves. The dashed lines labeled R/L are the estimated riparian lines. The red lines, solid and dashed, labeled P/L, are the property boundaries for the applicant. The appellants Manuel and Tammy Creolo appeal the issuance of the minor work permit, alleging that the length of the proposed access pier exceeds the length permitted by the Tampa Port Authority submerged land management rules, and allege that the navigation will be impeded if the mangroves that will surround the access pier die in the future. The issues are determined by the hearing officer's recommended order. SJW Group and EPC filed a joint motion to dismiss and motion for summary recommended order prior to the full evidentiary hearing. After the motion hearing, the hearing officer entered a recommended order affirming the issuance of the minor work permit and concluding that the length of the proposed access pier met the rule criteria of the submerged lands management rules, and the argument regarding navigation was speculative and did not raise a genuine issue of material fact. Each party was given the opportunity to submit exceptions to the findings of fact and conclusions of law contained in the recommended order within 10 days of entry of the recommended order. If exceptions were filed, each party would be allotted a 10-minute oral argument. Neither party filed exceptions to the recommended order. Therefore, there will be no oral argument from the parties on the recommended order at this hearing. However, the commission may ask questions of myself or either party regarding the evidence on record. Lastly, because there were no exceptions filed pursuant to section 1-2.35(c) rules of the EPC, the commission shall accept the hearing officer's findings of fact. Because there are no oral arguments, if the commission desires, I will provide my recommendation and explanation prior to the commission discussion and motions. Commissioner Smith, Chairperson. Does the commission wish to have my recommendation?
So do we have any questions for our council or any comments by anyone? Or if not, seeing none, then I would ask the council for your recommendation to the commission.
This is Tammy Creolo.
Yes, sorry. I was looking for hands raised, and I did not see your hand raised. So, Ms. Criollo, if you heard what we heard, it's my understanding, and Ms. Bartle is here on standby to correct me if I'm wrong, that you all, neither party at this point is able to make an argument, but could be available if any commissioners had questions.
Yeah. I thought I could make a comment during the public comment, but that didn't occur. I just wanted to just acknowledge the
let me just check here with Ms. Bartle. Ms. Bartle, can you advise the applicants about what they can and cannot speak to at this point?
Yes. So to all the parties, if you're asked any questions of the commissioners, please bear in mind that no new evidence can be presented. So you can only discuss evidence that's on record in relation to the questions asked. It sounds like Ms. Criollo has a public comment that she wished to present earlier. So Commissioner Smith, I leave that up to you if that's appropriate now at this time, since she was not able to present earlier.
Okay, if it's okay with you, Ms. Bartle, it's okay with me to hear what Ms. Criollo has to say in a public comment format, which would be limited to 3 minutes. Okay.
As long as there's no objections from either party, Mr. Reale or Mr. Marotti.
This is Rick Marotti for the EPC Executive Director. I think Ms. Creole didn't understand when she should have given her public comment, so I have no objection to her doing it now as opposed to having done it a few minutes ago.
All right, but Ms. Criollo, be aware that if you stray into any matters that are not part of the record of the case or not allowed to be brought up in this quasi-judicial proceeding at this time, the attorneys will interrupt at some point. But with that, please feel free to deliver your public comment in 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, when I spoke up earlier, I thought I was going to be invited to make a public comment, and then I didn't apparently signal properly. But all I wanted to say is I want to thank the EPC Commission, Mrs. Bartles, and Officer LaFrance for the process. Even though maybe the outcome wasn't what I had hoped for, it provided me the understanding. I felt that we had a fair hearing. I just want to thank you. And that's all.
Is that all? Okay.
That's it. I just want to thank everyone for the process and for the time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Criollo. And I understand how stressful sometimes these matters can be, believe me. So we appreciate your participation and going through this entire process with the EPC in the within the guardrails of the process. Thank you very much for being here and being available in case any of the commissioners had any questions for further information.
Well, thank you for the process and letting us go through it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And given that Ms. Criollo made her public comments at this time, is there anything Mr. Reale would like to say if he did not understand the public comment rules?
Good morning, Commissioner. No, we will stand on the order in the brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So that brings us back to the this appeal matter. And Ms. Bartle, do you want to offer the recommendation to the commission of a recommended motion?
Yes, Commissioner. I will share my screen once more and get to my recommendation. So to start out, prior to giving my recommendation, I wanted to provide the explanation for it. Each party during my review of the recommended order, I looked over the conclusions of law and findings of fact provided by the hearing officer. And I want to point out two changes that are contained in my recommendation in the proposed final order. So the two corrections that I've identified is in paragraph 2 of the findings of fact of the recommended order. Section 9 is written instead of Section 8 of the EPC Act. Section 8 contains the authority for EPC to cooperate with public agencies, whereas Section 9 is the administrative appeal procedures. Secondly, in paragraph 3 of the findings of fact in the recommended order, the appealed minor work permit number is 69410 and not 694410 as listed in the recommended order. So my recommendation moving forward is that based on the evidence, the findings of fact, and conclusions of law in the recommended order, and on the basis that no party filed exceptions and the findings of fact shall be adopted by the commission, is to adopt the hearing officer's findings of fact and conclusions of law with correction to the two Scrivener's errors in paragraph 2 and 3 of the recommended order, and also to affirm the hearing officer's recommendation upholding the issuance of the minor work permit for the construction of the 4-foot wide access pier. The commission will have the opportunity to deliberate on this matter, ask questions, and rule on the hearing officer's recommended order. During the commissioner's deliberations, please keep in mind that the questions asked must be limited to the evidence on record. If the commission determines that there is a genuine issue of material facts not addressed by the hearing officer, they may remand the case back to the hearing officer for additional findings. But please bear in mind that the fact issues not raised by the appellant's notice of appeal shall be accepted as undisputed. If no additional findings are needed from the hearing officer, a vote may be taken to render a final order adopting the hearing officer's findings of fact and making appropriate conclusions of law. Secondly, if a final order is rendered in today's proceeding, a second motion will be needed to authorize the chairperson to execute a final order prepared by me as commission counsel in accordance with the commission's ruling today. This concludes my introduction for the final order hearing and recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Bartle. Commissioner White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, I can appreciate that this is probably causing some level of stress for the neighbors and whatnot, but based upon the record that I have before me and the presentation that I've received today, I would move to adopt the hearing officer's findings of fact, make the appropriate conclusions of law, and render a final order in the above referenced case to also correct the noted Scrivener's errors and to affirm the hearing officer's recommendation upholding the issuance of the minor work permit for construction of the 4-foot wide access pier.
Second.
Second.
Great. I have a motion from Commissioner White along the lines of the council's recommendation, seconded by Commissioner Cohen. Is there any further board discussion? I can see the people participating virtually as well as here, and I see no hands raised, no further discussion, so we'll take a roll call vote on the motion.
Smith?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Hagan?
Yes.
Kemp?
Yes.
Overman?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you. And Can I also have a motion to authorize the chair to execute a final order prepared by Commission Counsel based on the Commission's ruling?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Cohen, second by Commissioner White. Let's take a roll call vote.
Smith,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Hagan,
Yes.
Kemp,
Yes.
Overman.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Thank you, and that concludes that matter and takes us to 9B on our agenda, the Piney Point Gypsum Stack update. And Commissioners, I know we just had an update by Ms. Doherty last week at our EPC, at our County Commission meeting, but we are very fortunate to have an EPC with scientists here who have been studying our bay, the chemistry of the water, the bay bottom, the benthic organisms of the bay for decades. And this is a matter that we'll be following for some time. So following the update that we had at the board meeting, we are able to have, and besides, this matter is, has been kind of changing daily. And so we're fortunate to be able to have an update today on this matter from our very own Environmental Protection Commission. Thank you, Ms. Doherty. You're recognized.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we will briefly go over, just for the public's edification, a little recap of the Piney Point incident and give a brief summation of some of the activities that are occurring currently right now. And that presenter will be Tom Ash. I would like to let everyone know Mr. Ash is an assistant director in the Water Division with 30-plus years experience, but he also serves on the Estuary Program Science Board. He's on the Nitrogen Management Consortium. He works closely with Commissioner White, who serves on the Estuary Program Policy Board. So we've had 40 years of continuous water monitoring. We have a good baseline to see where we'll be at. But this process is something that will take months and maybe even years to decipher the impacts. So with that, Tom Ash.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tom Ash, EPC staff. I will go ahead and share my screen as well. As Ms. Doherty said, I'm going to briefly touch on some of the things that you heard last week at the BOCC meeting, but I don't want to dwell too much on that. But for the listening public, we do need to stress right out of the gate that this facility is in Manatee County. So it is privately owned. It has been closed since 2010 per the requirements of Florida Administrative Code. So the DEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, is the primary agency with jurisdiction over its regulation. And again, since it is in Manatee County, we really don't have any authority over that facility. As you know, in March 25th, the site staff discovered an increased flow in some of the interceptor drains, and that is generally an indication that water is leaving the containment of the stack. They were afraid that leak would create a risk of pressurizing the very drain system, which then could ultimately lead to some instability and perhaps even an uncontrolled collapse of the stack. A lot of this is information that we've been watching in the news for the last couple of weeks. So the pond had about 480 million gallons of seawater mixed with stormwater and some of the legacy process water that was in the stack from their processing operations. For the benefit of everyone who's not familiar with that area, the stack is there in the center of your screen. It's the south cell, that rectangular cell. See if I can put my cursor on it there. And this east wall that we're in question, and then the flow would wind up going along Buckeye Road and then eventually into under Highway 41 and into a ditch that would discharge into Port Manatee proper. The DEP issued an emergency final order to allow an uncontrolled release of the, allow a controlled release of untreated water that was in the pond. And again, this was an effort that they needed to take to prevent loss of life, potential personal injury, severe property damage. So it was something that no one wanted to do, but in an abundance of caution, it had to be done. And DEP made that determination. On April 3rd, a few days later, HRK, who's the owner of the facility, had noted or reported that the stack wall had shifted laterally about 10 feet. This was another indication of a potential failure of the facility, and that triggered an evacuation notice by Manatee County officials and the surrounding area road closures. On April 3rd, the governor issued his executive order declaring a state of emergency for not only Manatee County, but also Hillsborough and Pinellas counties as well. And DEP immediately formed a technical working group with the U.S. Corps of Engineers, EPA, Southwest Florida Water Management District, the Florida Division of Emergency Management, and Artem & Associates, who are the consultants that are specialists in this type of facility and these structures. The emergency pumping was authorized on March 29th. They approximately 215 million gallons were ultimately pumped into Port Manatee, and there are approximately a little over 200 million gallons still remaining in the NGS, which stands for New Gypsum Stack South Pond. So those evacuation and road closures have since been lifted, and the risk of pond failure has subsided once the head pressure had been reduced to a point where everyone was comfortable with the stability of the stack. On April 8th, the DEP sent a dive company using submersibles into the stack, into the pond, and shored up the east wall where the breach had occurred. And they have installed a large steel plate, which is currently plugging the leak. And the emergency pumping from that site into the bay had ceased on April 9th. And since then, there have been no off-site discharges, particularly into Tampa Bay. To give you an overall summation of our monitoring program, you've seen me give this presentation before. All of those green dots are our water quality monitoring network within Tampa Bay. That's 52 water quality monitoring stations. That's a subset of our total 272 monitoring stations throughout Hillsborough County, including all the tributaries and minor tributaries. And the blue line is the county line. So you can see from this this yellow pentagon here, this is Port Manatee, this is where the discharge was occurring. But you can see its proximity to Hillsborough County, Manatee County, and even Pinellas County over here. So this is truly an all hands on deck event. In this part of the bay, all three counties' waters are in play. So that's why we have been so diligent about monitoring in this area. And I want to zoom in, as Ms. Doherty said, we have over almost 50 years of water quality monitoring data in Tampa Bay. Zooming into the area around the port, just to give you an idea, when we're out there and all of the subsequent monitoring events, in these boxes over here, you will see 5 to 6 year averages of what the water quality for those constituents in that part of the bay should be. So if any of those, like total nitrogen, total phosphorus, pH, salinity, turbidity, chlorophyll A, if any of those numbers start to look squirrely to us, we can immediately recognize that based on our longstanding history of monitoring the bay, and we can start the appropriate management responses. To date, where we have been, just EPC in the last 2 weeks as we've been following this event. The blue dots are our normal Hillsborough Bay stations. We just did those this week. There was some concern early on that some of this this discharge could work its way north, even as far north. More concerned it could make it to the desal plant. We've yet to see any indication of that. So I'm not terribly concerned at this point about that. The green dots are our normal lower Tampa Bay stations, which we will be monitoring again next week. As luck would have it, we monitored these very stations less than a week prior to the event. So we have very current background data, in addition, of course, to all of our historic data. And then the red and magenta dots are where we have been out there taking additional water samples above and beyond what we would normally do, in addition to, as was noted, some benthic samples, sediment chemistry, as well as the biota, the critters that live in the sand and in the sediment, so that we have a good feel for the biological and chemical response from the bottom of the bay as well. And I should note those magenta dots are actually Manatee County routine monitoring stations. We have, as well as Pinellas County, jumped in to help them lift some of this heavy load they're carrying. They are unfortunately working around the clock on the site itself and near the port, and they have not been able to get to their own routine monitoring stations. So we at EPC, as well as Pinellas County, have jumped in to help our colleagues to the south take care of that for them. So here, our monitoring has been going from since day one. Our monitoring has been made incredibly easier by the fact that we have 2 brand new boats, which were approved by this commission, championed by Commissioner White. On behalf of my staff, I would just like to thank you all for that. We have never been better prepared for an event like this. These boats have not been on the water more than a month. We just took delivery, and they are replacing equipment that was, in some cases, 30 years old. The boat you see in the lower part of the screen is a brand new version of the boat we just replaced that was 30 years old. So I know Ms. Doherty will cover that a little bit in her briefing as well, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for that. We are again conducting monitoring right alongside DEP, Manatee, Pinellas. The Tampa Bay Estuary program has been a key player in all of this, working with all of the regional stakeholders, and not focusing just on water quality, but also, again, the benthic communities, seagrasses, fisheries. The USF has been doing plume projections and trajectories and forecasting, and you'll see that in a second. NOAA has satellite imagery of algal blooms and potential algal blooms and tracking chlorophyll A from space, which is very cool. The primary pollutant of concern for us, of course, is the nutrients. Most of this water was about 5.5 in pH. It's not great, but it's not terrible either. Normally, that area should be about 8. So it's low, but it's not as low as it could be had it been purely processed water. So we're worried about the nutrients, particularly the nitrogen, and its possible response biologically in the long term. As is often the case in these situations, the biological response tends to lag behind the event. So we wouldn't necessarily see something right away. But within a week to 10 days, we are now starting to see increased plankton activity and biological activity from the microscopic organisms in the bay. And again, we have now samples for the bottom and seagrasses as well. But that's all just to say that the long-term monitoring effort for this is far from over. It could take some time before all of these impacts are fully understood, and all of the parties involved will continue to collect as much data as we can on this event. For the benefit of the public, the DEP has created a dashboard with daily updates on the site repairs, the total water remaining in the stack, the total water discharged to the bay, as well as the overview of all the monitoring efforts. The update on your screen is from April 12th. I have yesterday's update, and it's important for me to read this because there was no water leaving the stack as of a couple of days ago when we were briefing you all. Unfortunately, that situation has now changed. So to quote their dashboard at DEP, on Tuesday at approximately 3:30 p.m., a low-level flow was observed from the concentrated seepage area on the east wall of the new gypsum stack south compartment. Dive crews immediately arrived on scene and identified a small detachment underneath the plate, which was placed over the liner's seam separation. At this time, the low-level flow rate is consistent and not increasing. Crews continue to make progress in repairing the seal. No other leaks have been identified, and the released flow has remained within the on-site stormwater collection system. So we've been getting briefings, as we said, daily from DEP. The last several have been very promising in that no water was leaving the seepage area. Unfortunately, as of 2 days ago, that is no longer the case, and there is a slow seep which they are actively trying to repair. It's in the same spot as the original. Another dashboard which is very helpful for the public, and I recommend folks going to this, is the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's data dashboard. In addition to our sampling, monitoring data, the Estuary Program is reporting results from FDP, Manatee, and Pinellas County, as well as a number of other organizations. The thing I wanted to impress upon you with this slide is, again, the concerted and coordinated effort that has taken place. It is really unprecedented in my career here. And as you can see in the bottom bar of the dashboard, and this is a couple of days old, so the samples processed are 953 reported on that day. I'm sure that's over 1,000 by now. And 5 agencies reporting data at least, and this is all just within 12 days, and 78 sites. So again, I think this is an unprecedented level of response and monitoring, and the scientific community and the regulatory community in this area has really come together and stepped up, and we're very fortunate to have those resources in our own backyard. As I mentioned, we have this bay circulation from USS College of Marine Science and their ocean circulation group. This modeling effort led by Dr. Bob Weisberg is a staple now for all of us managing this event. They take into account wind, tide, current, geomorphology, and they can predict kind of where things will go in the bay based on those physical conditions. You probably are familiar with some of this imagery because it was used also during the red tide events of 2017, 2018, 2019. So this is how things looked on the 12th. As you can see, the yellow is where you need to concentrate a lot of your attention. Here along the eastern shoreline of Hillsborough and Manatee counties, the eastern part of the bay, I should say. The The main levels of concern for us are the water getting in, concentrated levels of nutrients, getting in these back bay areas, like Bishop's Harbor, like Cockroach Bay, like Terracea, Miguel Bay, and getting in there and not being able to flush out well. So the more the water can be out in the open bay and have the influence of the tide and wind and currents, the better off we'll all be, because those nutrients will flush out of the bay. And then this image on the 16th, what I'm going to try to do here is just toggle back and forth so you can kind of see how things are moving along that eastern shoreline of Tampa Bay. So again, we are focusing a lot from the port south, but we are not discounting any sloshing heading our way in the northern part of the county, or the southern part of Hillsborough County, I should say. So again, the monitoring is focused mainly from the Little Manatee River south to the Manatee River. The continuing actions for us, we will continue to conference daily with DEP on this event, along with other regional officials. And we have deployed our monitoring staff, as you've heard, with all of our partners, and we're doing our best to coordinate and reduce overlap, reduce duplication, and I think that's working out very well. The Estuary program is playing a lead role in kind of being the ringleader of keeping us all going in the right direction and not stepping on each other. We have been fielding a number of citizen complaints or citizen concerns and inquiries on our office phones, and responding to those as they come in to kind of allay anyone's fears of, can we swim, can we fish, can we do our normal recreational activities in the bay. The DEP is indicating nutrient reduction and removal treatments have been deployed on site. They are working with a number of different options to move that forward, and they will continue to evaluate the condition of the liner, certainly now that there is a seepage that has been detected in the last couple of days. As far as the management options on the site, and I'll stress here that EPC has very little to do with this. Again, this will be DEP and Manatee County and the engineers on site spearheading these efforts. But they do have, they believe they have the capacity to hold excess rainwater. As a number of you have expressed, we are coming into rainy season, and there is some concern about adding water, additional water, to an already overburdened system. But long term, we're looking, the DEP and others are looking at routing the water to Manatee County utilities. Some of that has already happened. Enhancing their existing evaporation technology, treating all of the water that's leaving the site to the appropriate regulatory levels prior to any future releases. And then underground injection, which is still on the table, not a popular option, but they're not discounting anything at this point. And as well as transporting to other facilities which may have additional storage capacity that they can loan out. So the state at many levels is studying all of the options for these more permanent long-term solutions to Piney Point. And as you've heard just in the last couple of days, the governor has pledged $15.5 million from DEP, their existing budget, to treat the remaining water that's on site. A lot of that money will go into these technologies to treat that existing water. And also the governor and the legislature have proposed $100 million from the state budget for ultimate site closure. And finally, I want to leave these up there for you and for the public. These are the state contacts and resources. If you have questions, concerns, comments, DEP certainly, and Manatee County's Public Information Office as well. But DEP is the lead organization, and they are very well suited for answering these kind of questions, comments, and concerns. And with that, commissioners, I will, both I and Mr. El-Rabi are available for questions.
Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, and we are so fortunate to be able to have our own local EPC working with as you said, the other agencies that are supporting each other and coming together on this issue. We are all seeing reports on the news. We're seeing fishermen reporting what they're seeing on the bay. But to be able to have our own scientists with this decades and decades long experience of and baseline data of what is really normal and what is new going on, and from your knowledge base is incredibly valuable. Board members, if you have any questions of our expert. Ms. Doherty, did you have anything to add to that?
Commissioners, I just would like to thank Sam El-Rabi, Tom Ash, the whole water team. We're tremendously respected all over the state and nationally for our water monitoring. We have the longest continuous water monitoring program in the nation. And it's important for us because that gives us a baseline. So when disasters like this happen, we actually know what the condition of the bay was beforehand. And I also wanted to thank the FDP. They reached out to us immediately because of our reputation. And Sam El-Rabi and I met with Noah Valenstein and a handful of stakeholders right when the issue was happening down in South County, in Hillsborough County. So just want to thank everybody on the water team because they mobilized right away in those boats and went out and did the heavy lifting. So that was all I had to add.
Very glad to see those new boats being put to good use. Commissioner White was a champion of bringing that to the board, and we can see how important it is to equip our agency appropriately. This has been a very dynamic situation, and those of you who came thinking, oh, we're going to look at this again, I'm sure are now feeling like we got another level and another layer of knowledge, and it's really the rain that we had last weekend, as he noted, added millions of gallons to that reservoir, and then to understand that we have another leak. So, but so far that's not going into the bay, correct?
That's correct. All the water that is leaving the seepage at this point is staying within the on-site stormwater pond.
And it is very worrying to see that yellow spreading upwards towards and into the mouth of Cockroach Bay already, but it's comforting to know that that is being monitored. Now, if our constituents want specific information, do we send them directly to those numbers for DEP, or is there somebody at EPC where a commissioner at least could call? What do you advise about contacting for information?
Commissioners can call myself, Sam El-Rabi, Tom Ash, anytime if you need information, you or your assistants at any time. But for members of the public, we have that information on our website, and so if they need to reach out to get the dashboards for the FDEP, there are actually numbers there that they can talk to the people. So they're getting, with the Estuary program and the DEP, going to our linking to them, they're getting real-time data all the time. But we will answer any constituent questions, obviously, but if they really want it right from the horse's mouth, it'd be best to go to the regulator, which would be the DEP.
I really appreciate this presentation today and the level of detail that we are able to continue monitoring and understanding the real nature of this. For better, for worse, whatever it actually is, we can rely on this science-based information right here. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. And as you said, Commissioner Smith, this has been a really illuminating presentation with a lot of depth and deeply appreciated, but also it is amazing that we have the resources at our hands to do this. And so that's excellent. And I was glad to get the kind of granular, at least for me, presentation of what is going on there. I would just like to ask, has there been any effects noticed in terms of fish kills at this time? And second, if that were going to happen, I mean, we're still anticipating that is possible, or this just dissipates, and what are the worst effects that we could see in the future? Would that be fish kills, red tide type of issues, or what are the possible outcomes, negative ones, with regards to this?
Well, Commissioner, the primary thing we're concerned about, of course, are those nutrients going into the bay. They act as plant food, just as they do on your lawn, they do in the bay, and they would feed the plankton blooms, which then would likely ultimately be the culprit in any fish kill involved. Whether it be what are termed hazardous algal blooms, which produce neurotoxins to fish, much as red tide, or whether they just suck all of the oxygen out of a given body of water and the fish have nowhere to go and they suffocate. So the fish kill, we have not documented any fish kills to date. That's good news. But we, for that reason, and others, were tracking that plume very carefully and tracking the plankton. Things generally tend to start microscopic and then become macroscopic. So we look at the microscopic stuff, make sure we have no blooms occurring, and then from there we'll anticipate the biological response beyond that. But again, it's hard to predict. We have obviously a previous event back in, I believe, 2011 to kind of gauge this kind of thing. So we did see microscopic and macroalgae blooms. There were, I think, some localized fish kills associated with that. So we're all looking for those types of responses.
And just one more question: is there a time when I know those colors are on the map, but is there a time when in 3 months or 4 months or 6 months or a year that we can, whatever that is some projected time where we could feel as though the impacts have been totally accounted for?
Yeah, and again, as you alluded to, I wouldn't be able to put my finger on an absolute date or timeline for that. One thing that's working in our favor, I mentioned the proximity to Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, and Manatee. That's a bad thing because it affects so many people in lower Tampa Bay. It's a good thing, though, that it is lower Tampa Bay, because that's the part of the bay that's going to flush more thoroughly and more quickly due to its proximity to the Gulf of Mexico. So the best thing we can hope for is some strong northerly winds and some strong tidal currents that can help flush that water out into the Gulf as quickly as possible. And then what happens to it from there is anyone's guess. There will still be a large nutrient load. We could wind up spreading some of those algal blooms farther along the Gulf Coast, the southwest Gulf Coast. I can tell you our colleagues in Sarasota County are watching this very carefully, since they're watching some red tide in Charlotte Harbor, Charlotte County area currently. So the nexus of that bloom with these nutrients would not be a favorable condition for the Gulf Coast of Florida.
Great, thank you.
So, thank you everybody in the public is asking, what about the other gypsum stacks? What about the ones we have in our county? What about the rest of them in the state? And so I think as we are monitoring and understanding and doing our best to advocate for the best solutions for Piney Point, the next steps will be to understand how can we ensure that the other stacks in Hillsborough County are not in danger of similar disasters, or if they are, how can we address that? And so let me ask Ms. Doherty, is that appropriate to, put on a future agenda a report about the stacks that we have on our EPC agenda, or do you see that as something that should go to the county commission?
We're happy to have it here. It's really the pleasure of the board. I think sometimes you have more time at this meeting to ask questions and go into more depth. And we've done, just as we're doing with the Planning Commission in May for the vulnerability assessment, Lucia Garces and the administration, we have done co-presentations together at usually at the EPC meeting again because of time. But it's completely the pleasure of the board.
I would love to bring that back here. I'm seeing some head nodding, so I don't know that that's and I think you can see this is the direction of the commission to, no rush, but to move from here into answering those questions. In the first place, I understand that the Riverview Mosaic stack that we have, the old CF Industries site, these are all each in different conditions than the Piney Point stack. And so it would be good to have a report of exactly how vulnerable they are and how they're operating and how they differ and how they're similar to the Piney Point stack. But also, so understanding what the situation is, what the protections are, and what the vulnerabilities are. But moving from that, what other protections should we advocate for? Understanding that not everything is within our purview, but we can still advocate for solutions moving forward. So those two sides of those discussions. What about the maybe even the mining areas in the southeast area of the county?
I'm happy to bring back as big a presentation as you want. There's a lot of, there's, I want to say 20 plus chip stacks. There's mining permits that are in the queue for the south part of the county. As you remember, on our border, when the sinkhole happened several years ago, that was 1 mile from the county line. Commissioner White was very involved with that, giving people water that were in the area. They had production wells, and so everything was kept on site. So what I would like to do is maybe get with staff and get with you, Commissioner, and see just how big the scope is. I mean, I think the first step is understanding what's within the boundaries of the two sites. These sites are, long-standing sites, lots of, we just went through the Piney Point presentation. You see how long that took. There's a lot of technical information. So I would recommend we start with that, and then we maybe scope out to the mines that surround us, because obviously you have a process stack here, so you are receiving material from outside your boundaries that comes into here for processing.
And I think we've all had a wake-up call that as horrendous as the environmental impacts could be from an uncontrolled spill, and we've all seen that in history here. There are other dangers and vulnerabilities of our infrastructure that we just understood were in harm's way as well. So with our new thinking to look at the other stacks and understand where we can assure the public that we are good for a while there, and where we might need to advocate, as I say, for better protection. So
That's very important point. Years ago, I built a house on the Alafia River, and 5 days after our dock was installed, there was a huge release and a huge kill and die-off of a lot of fish and things in the Alafia River at the time. So maybe that would be to identify ones that could have a direct impact to us, whether they're on our borders or they're on our tributaries externally from the county. So we'll get with you, Commissioner, and we'll try and prioritize how that looks, and we'll do subsequent presentations in the future.
And the last question I have, I don't know if Mr. Ash has any comment on this, but possibly moving forward either way, is any thoughts about the injection wells that may happen in Manatee County and any impacts of that on the aquifer, the ground? Mr. Ash, do you have any comment on that, or is that something we might consider another time?
Yeah, and I would defer that to our engineering expert, Mr. El Rabi. I'm not being an engineer, I'm a marine biologist, so that's a little out of my wheelhouse, Commissioner.
Commissioner Smith, this is Sam El Rabi, EPC staff. That is one option they're looking at amongst other options, and if they go that route, it typically takes a couple, 3 years to permit.
Okay.
And there are a lot of concerns down in Manatee County. There may be some oppositions to it, but it's one option amongst lots of other options to deal with that processed water on site.
Thank you. So that's another thing to our list to monitor as we go. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. And I really, truly appreciate this conversation because we have a level of vulnerability that honestly may have not been effectively assessed. So from a variety of sources, we do have mining pits, but we also have gypsum stacks, we have a variety of things. And given what we just heard from Mr. El Rabi, just one of the mitigation ways of dealing with this takes a significant amount of time to fix. And as we've seen with the Manatee situation, the impacts have a variety of results. And in our county, where we're dealing with low water volumes, wells, development, and these risks, I believe it would be appropriate to develop a risk assessment of those activities within the county that would create an environmental or a safety risk to the citizens in our county. I do know that, or at least I've been informed, that many of the gypsum stacks that are active in Hillsborough County fall under newer regulations and have higher safety measures. But if that is in fact true, we need to also know what the risks are when those measures have been effectively, implemented. And then what our course of, as boards, as EPC members or county commissioner members, what actions we would actually be asked to do to mitigate that. As we've learned over the last year, the impact of not being fully prepared for a pandemic and how disruptive that is to the way we operate and the way it impacts our citizens' lives, I think an assessment of the risks of these kinds of activities within our county borders, because we're surrounded by other individuals, and water and our bay is something that impacts not only our county, but also surrounding counties. I think it would be wise to go ahead and consider an assessment of these types of activities that impact our citizens and would actually impact the way our services are delivered to the county. So I'll stop there. But I agree with you, Chair, that I think it would be wise to really look at what our risks are to our water sources and to and the environmental impact that it would have of these kinds of activities that do impact our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kemp, is your hand still up, or you have another comment? There we go. All right. Seeing Commissioner Cohen, you're
Hey,
right.
I just want to briefly concur with everything that's been said. I think as a relatively new commissioner, this has been a very eye-opening situation, and I particularly want to thank the staff of the EPC for all of the really good information. Tampa Bay Water's also given us some good information as well. The only thing I want to add, I want to agree with the idea of doing it here in the EPC. I think we have more time and to really get into the details of the scope of what we're looking at. And I just want to add the point that the quicker the better, because there's an awful lot of federal money that is about to flow down for all kinds of infrastructure projects all over the country. And I would think that the quicker we can identify what our vulnerabilities are, the quicker we can get into the pipeline of trying to get some maybe federal resources down here to deal with some of it. I don't think any of us were quite prepared for the size and scope of this problem until this happened. And it's going to take more than just the county in order to start fixing it. So I just want to concur that I think it's a really good idea to move forward on this and to do it here rather than in the Board of County Commissioners where we're so busy with other things.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more. Ms. Doherty.
I'd just like to add, Commissioner Cohen, we have a working group with the environmental, Kevin Moran, John Lyons. At this point, it would be Mr. Fessler. I'm sure Mr. Horwedel as well. And since you're talking about federal monies, we'll convene that group to maybe help us all talk about the risks from, we're getting ready to talk about another subject. There's a lot of industries here. There are a lot of them in the Bay. There's a harbor safety committee, but obviously everyone's aware from, sulfur to anhydrous ammonia, those type of issues. So maybe dealing with them, because the EOC, that's what happened when there was a release in Hillsborough County. A hurricane came through. So maybe we're talking about a vulnerability assessment, we're talking about federal dollars, but really us conferring with the administration may help expedite those concrete projects. So I'll reach out to Mr. Fessler this week, and we'll get to a meeting together.
Awesome. All right. That, I think, wraps up the Piney Point. And our next matter on the agenda is the Gopher Resources from one environmental disaster to another. Ms. Doherty, take it away.
Yes, Commissioner. And again, this was presented at your BOCC meeting. Mr. Woodard has tried to, as briefly as possible, he will be the presenter. He is the air director. We also have the assistant director, Reggie Sanford, on the line as well to answer questions. Together, they both have 30-plus years experience with the permitting of this facility over decades as it changed ownership. But we will try and keep it as brief as possible. And so, Sterling, with that, Sterling Woodard.
Okay, good morning, Commissioner. Sterling Woodard, EPC staff. I'm going to try to share my screen. All right. I'm here this morning to give you a brief update on the Gopher Resource Plant here in Tampa, also called as Environmental Technology, Environment-Focused Technologies. The facility is right off of Columbus Avenue and 66th Street over by the Tampa Bypass Canal. And what you see right here is the current facility that was purchased by Gopher in 2006, but the facility existed prior to that as Gulf Coast Recycling, and it's been at that site since 1964. But as you can see, this is a plant that has been significantly expanded and enclosed in an entire building. Now, before I get started, I just want to say that the EPC actually regulates air outside, okay, which is called ambient air. And that's under our Act, Chapter 84-446. So any air or worker exposures inside the building are the responsibility of OSHA. Now, the DEP is also the delegated agency for waste and water issues, as well as air. But what they have done is they've delegated some of the permitting and most of the compliance and enforcement of air pollution sources in Hillsborough County to the EPC, okay? I won't rehash all of the issues that were alleged in the Tampa Bay Times articles, but just suffice it to say that what the Tampa Bay Times was alleging is that employees inside the Gopher plant were breathing in air that was hundreds of times higher than what OSHA's standards were for worker protection. And their respirators or PPE wasn't sufficient to protect against lead and sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide that was also inside the building. They allege in the article that this was due to equipment breakdowns and poor operation and maintenance of a lot of the equipment inside the building. Those allegedly high levels led to high blood level of the employees that was not as high enough to remove the workers from the areas, but it was high enough that it should have triggered an inspection by OSHA over the years. But even though it wasn't higher than OSHA's threshold for removal, it was higher than what the CDC considers to be elevated blood levels in workers. Now, EPC, because we are delegated by the DEP and the EPA for air pollution, most of the permits have been issued by us in the past, but once they got their permit back in 2008 for the major expansion, which actually increased their production from around 26,500 tons a year of lead to almost 200,000 in 2020. The DEP took over the permitting of all the construction permits and issued most of the renewal permits, which are done every 5 years. We do some of the minor revisions to the operating permits, but they did that because this became such a major facility. But what they did was they expanded the operation, modernized it, and put a building over it to enclose all of their operations. The previous operations before 2006 was kind of like a small blast furnace with open on 3 sides, so air could move through and it would blow lead and other pollutants, around the community, and it created a problem in the past. But most of the major air pollution sources inside the building, the furnaces, the dryers, the refining areas, emit particulates, lead, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds, as well as sulfur dioxide. Those emissions are emitted in such a high quantity that they are controlled by these large, multi-million-dollar air pollution control devices called baghouses, scrubbers, and afterburners. But any emissions that may escape those direct sources that are vented to these control devices, and the control devices are outside, anything that escapes inside the building is also controlled by a building enclosure, which is required to be under a slight negative pressure. So anything that's emitted inside that building is vented to another control device. So they have a number of baghouses that control all the emissions from the building. The air pollution permits that are issued by the DEP and us don't regulate air inside the building. They regulate the pollution control devices and the air pollution sources inside the building, okay? The permit requires Gopher to operate and maintain that equipment in accordance with good air pollution control practices and in accordance with these permits and the rules. They're also required to conduct periodic emissions testing of these air pollution control devices to make sure that they're operating properly. They're required to maintain records and monitors, continuous emissions monitors that measure the emissions directly and continuously from the control devices, and submit reports to both the EPC, the DEP, and the EPA for review. Now, since that time, with all of this permitting that has occurred, there have been problems because when they expanded the plant in 2008, they completed construction in 2012. There were over a number of different inspections that we've conducted, and there have been some issues that have come out of those inspections. We've gone out to the facility almost 100 times since 2006 to inspect it, to audit those compliance tests that they're required to conduct, and also to review their records. Out of those inspections that we do, there have been 7 significant enforcement actions. So while there have been all these allegations of things that have been going on at the facility, we have been involved with the facility and have taken appropriate action anytime that there were violations of our permit, which regulated the outside air, the air pollution control devices, or the air pollution sources inside the building. Those penalties have been upwards of over $500,000, and they were a result of sometimes failing those emissions tests, sometimes poor operation and maintenance, and even fires that have occurred with some of the bag houses. But more than that, about $200,000 of it has been cash penalties, but more important than that has been about $300,000 has been in supplemental environmental projects, which were designed to go beyond just the corrective actions, but to look for ways in which the facility could improve their operations so that we wouldn't have these kinds of problems in the past. Those included things like third-party audits, where you would hire a professional engineering consulting firm to come in and look at their operation, look at their design to see if things needed to be improved. I won't go through all of these, but these are just a number of the enforcement cases that resulted in them putting on additional air pollution controls or actually improving their operations. It went beyond just the compliance, but it was to correct the problems and actually look up for better ways and better solutions to try to control the emissions. The one that I will highlight is this one right here, and it actually gives you a picture of one of the problems that they had. Down in the bottom of the screen is the reverberatory furnace. And if you look over on the right-hand side, you see that orange flame. That's where the lead, the molten lead, is tapped. Once it's charged and melted, they will drain that off and put it into what is called these molds. Well, the emissions go up, that cylindrical object there, and what ended up happening, there was a fire that occurred because embers went up through the ducts and into one of these bag houses. What you see over on the left and on the right is the bottom of the hopper, which receives the dust. When the bag house receives the pollution, it goes across these bags, and the bags collect them, but then they're required to be shaken automatically. But those embers went up through there and burned the bags, and it burned the bottom. So you see these black marks, and you see blistering where the paint was peeling because of the fires. This is the bottom of the hopper where the material falls down and is conveyed out. So one of the things that they did was they put in what is called like a spark arrestor or spark cooler that in the future would prevent any spark, if it did happen, going up through the ducts and burning up the bags. But more importantly, they included Teflon bags, which are much more resistant to fires if somehow the spark arrestor failed. So the issue is we've had a number of issues where we worked with them to have third-party consultants to come in and to look at ways in which they can improve what they did. This is one of those issues. But actually, the corrective actions that were highlighted before some of these actions were the corrective actions cost in the tens of millions of dollars. These bag houses and afterburners and control devices are extremely expensive. Gopher's estimated that they spent about $140 million on environmental health and safety controls. In addition to us going out and inspecting and using the enforcement mechanism that we have at our disposal, we also have a network of air pollution monitors all around the county. But more importantly, we have monitors that ring the facility, because ultimately the facility is required to operate in compliance with the permit, but the permit is there so that they will demonstrate compliance with the ambient air quality standards, which is set up and designed to protect the public's health and welfare. So what we have here is down in the bottom is a picture of the plant again, and over on the left-hand side, you see our monitoring network, and up in the left extreme corner at the top is a picture of our CSX rail yard permit monitoring site. It monitors for lead, and it's actually just south of the facility almost on the fence line in the CSX rail yard. It measures particulate. There's also a patent monitor that was actually east of the facility, right on the fence line, and what we call the EFT, which is EnviroFocus Technologies monitor that was set up right on the west of the property, where there was formerly there was a mobile home park. And then most importantly for us is that we maintain a monitor which is at the Kinley Elementary site, which is about a half a mile north of the facility. So that gives us a sense of what the impact is to the community by this facility, even though it's enclosed and even though it's required to be maintained under negative pressure. So this graph right here shows you the results of that lead monitoring. Some of the monitors were discontinued after EnviroFocus or Gopher purchased the properties, like the patent site. They purchased the lumberyard that was there, so that was discontinued. The EFT site, they purchased the mobile home park, so that site is discontinued. But the Kinley site still operates, CSX still operates. And what you see here is you see the levels, how they have changed and been reduced over the time. The red line shows you the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, which was 1.5 micrograms per cubic meter. That standard was changed in 2008 and it became effective in June of 2012. And what you'll see is the lower line over on the right-hand side is the new standard, which was lowered by an order of magnitude to 0.15 micrograms per cubic meter. So in order to comply, EnviroFocus enclosed the plant, put in all of this air pollution control devices, and as you can see, how the lead levels have come down over the years to the point now where we are now in compliance, as well as the whole state of Florida is in compliance with all the national ambient quality standards for every pollutant that there is. This didn't happen just overnight. It was because of a lot of the permitting, the compliance, the enforcement actions, and the upgrades to the facility. So the overall air quality has improved, and that's really the area that the EPC is responsible for. Now, the EPA and OSHA's response is that Congresswoman Kathy Castor on March 26th sent a letter to the EPA raising concerns about air, water, and waste impacts from the facility. So we immediately got an email and phone calls from our counterparts in air up in Region 4 EPA, and they wanted to know what was going on. They wanted to get information from us so they could respond back to Congresswoman Castor. And we provided that information to them. At this point, we're still working with them to coordinate their investigation and providing as much cooperation. Most of the time, if they're going to come down and do something, they will notify us so that we and them and the DEP can deal with it in a joint. But in addition to that, the Congresswoman Castor also asked for the DOJ and OSHA to launch an investigation into the facility. And on April 5th, OSHA and the Department of Health all began their inspection of the Gopher facility. And then last week, of course, the BOC directed us to ask for an expedited review of the facility, which has already occurred. I think I went to the end. Okay. And now, just to let you know that because DEP has the delegated jurisdiction on the water and wastewater issues, they do have a process, water permit, a wastewater treatment plant permit that deals with the processed water from the DEP. They have a stormwater permit from the DEP, and all of those are regulated by them. And DEP, if there are any questions that anyone has, that probably should be directed to them. There have been historic groundwater impacts, and they have been identified by the DEP and the EPA, and they're working with Gopher Industries to try to deal with that cleanup. And with that being said, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. And I just am feeling again how incredibly lucky we are to have our own EPC here on the ground with us, because You know, the EPA and the federal EPA, the state DEP are great, and we're lucky to live in a country with those kinds of environmental agencies. But when they have delegated their authority to our own county's Environmental Protection Commission to do the monitoring and the regulation of the air quality in our area, we are all the better for it. As Mr. Woodard's presentation showed, it's our local efforts really that has brought our air quality into compliance with the standards. I was just in October out at E.G. Simmons Air Quality Monitoring Station with Mr. Woodard. How long has Mr. Woodard been with EPC?
31 years.
That's right, that's right. I mean, we have such a wealth of experience and long-term knowledge and passion for our local natural resources. But I was there with him and the administrator of the federal EPA and the local, state, regional EPA administrator, as well as representatives of DEP, as we were celebrating that we were finally bringing our air quality into control. So while the EPC is doing a great job controlling the air quality on the outside, and thanks to some of the regulatory action, including Gopher and other industries like that, we've brought our air quality within the standards. The OSHA, federal OSHA is responsible for the inside air quality, and that's what is creating such danger. Commissioner Myers, I know you are working on putting together a public event for blood testing. You want to speak about? I'm sorry to surprise you with that question, but I think it would be a good opportunity to let people know where you are at with that. I think that's going to be very important.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we do have a meeting scheduled for April 21st at 6 p.m. And this meeting is to inform the community. There are several communities that is surrounded by Gopher Industries. And Congresswoman Kathy Castle's staff will be there, our own EPC, Department of Health, Tampa City Councilman Orlando Goose, and School Board Member Henry Shake Washington will all be attending this meeting. We really want to educate the community about the lead poisoning, and then set up a second meeting for them to come back and be tested as well. And so I think for all of the partners that are working with me for this meeting on April 21st, and I'm just grateful that everyone have the time to come out, because this is a serious issue in our county. And I thank the Tribune for the Tampa Bay Times for breaking the story, because otherwise we wouldn't have known what is going on in our community with these series of articles of 18 months for the Black and brown community, when there are two plants. The one up north, I can't remember where up north, but that plant does have no issues compared to the plant here in Tampa. And so I'm happy to see all of the partners that have gone out in an emergency situation to bring this particular company under compliance, or it might need to be shut down. We just don't know, but we have to do something.
Thank you very much, and thanks for letting me invite you to share that information with us, because it is so important that we inform the actual impacted community, not just, and I know you're working not just with the employees and their family, but making sure that the other citizens, students in the area understand what is going on in their neighborhood. Because I mean, like I said last week, I grew up here and I had no idea this was going on until we saw this investigative journalism, long-form piece coming out in our Times, a local newspaper. But thanks very much.
Let me just say this, we partnered with the school board. Yesterday, we sent out a flyer to Kinley Elementary to let the parents know about the meeting on April 21st.
Excellent.
So that's another way to get the message out.
Thank you very much for
Sure.
working with the community in that very district to make sure that everyone is aware of what's going on and has the access to testing of blood levels of lead. Yes. And so we really understand what the threats and vulnerabilities are in this situation.
And I'll take my hand down now. You probably didn't see it.
I did not see that. But I had ESP. I just knew I should call on you. And with that, seeing no further discussion, Ms. Doherty, do you have anything to add to that? But did I thank Mr. Woodard enough? Because that was an awesome, thorough presentation, and I really appreciate his presentation. So,
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I think I forgot to add that during our conversations with the EPA, they elected not to come down, but to allow us to go out and begin the inspections and investigations. So I just wanted to let you know that we've been out to the facility since Tuesday, and we've been out there every day since then. And we're following up on the validity of the different allegations that were in the articles.
See, it's just so, we're just so lucky to have this ability. Other counties would have to be relying on these non-local regulatory agencies, which, do a fine job, but cannot match what we are able to do with our own local, long experienced scientists right here with the EPC. Ms. Doherty, wrap it up.
Yes, Commissioner. I just wanted to say we met air containment right before the pandemic hit, and that's when we went out to the air monitoring station down by Apollo Beach with Administrator Wheeler. But I just want to thank not only Sterling Woodard, Reggie Sanford, who's also on the call and has been with the agency 30 plus years, but all the air monitoring staff. When we had to go working remotely, we contacted the EPA, and air monitoring is an essential and critical thing for us to do, and that's exactly what the EPC said. This is mission critical. You will still go out and collect air monitoring samples every day, as you always have done. And they have done that, and they have done it flawlessly. A great job. Thank you, and thank you to Jason Waters, who heads up that group, and all the people in that group as well. So thank you, and we'll keep you updated as more information becomes available.
Commissioner Cohen.
I just wanted to ask Commissioner Myers, do you have a venue, a place yet for that meeting? Do you know where it's going to be held?
Yeah, Kinley Park, County's Kinley Park, 3101 North 66th Street. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, and that brings us to the legislative update. Mr. Marotti.
All right. Good morning again, Commissioners. Just a brief update on the 2021 legislative session on environmental and administrative bills of interest. And I think our EPC MIS staff is going to pull up my slides, but I'll just keep going. There we go. Thank you. The session began March 2nd and runs 60 days unless it's extended, and should convene on April 30th. And we can go to the next slide, and actually 2 slides to the petroleum slide. One of the things we track every year is petroleum tanks cleanup budget matters, and the annual appropriations typically around a little over $100 million. And this year, in the proposed budget of the House, it's $70 million, and the proposed budget of the Senate, it's $60 million, so well below what typically would be needed. And if you recall the presentation we had at our last meeting about petroleum cleanup, we are delegated by the state to help oversee cleanup of leaky gas stations and other petroleum discharges, and full funding for the state is obviously ideal, so we're hoping to see that. The good news is there's a House, the House has also proposed $100 million in non-reoccurring monies from pandemic funds that could close the gap and probably get full funding, but we'll have to wait how the session ends on that one. And as always, we track that very closely every year. If we could advance 2 slides, please. Moving to the dangerous tree preemption. There's 3 different types of bills with on dangerous tree preemption. If you recall, 2 years ago, this bill became a law. It preempted local governments from regulating the trimming or removal of trees that were deemed dangerous by an arborist or a landscaper certified. But obviously, this is a preemption on very effective local tree ordinances. There's 3 classes of bills. None of them are moving, but I always like to keep you updated on this one because I know it's of interest to a lot of the commissioners. The first one, Senate Bill 596, is a proposal of a full repeal. The second one, House Bill 1167 and Senate Bill 1396, is one that would redefine residence to also include mobile home parks, not just single-family homes. And then the third one, Senate Bill 916, it changes the concept of a dangerous tree to one that's of an unacceptable risk, but gives a lot more criteria through an ANSI standard as to how you would determine if it's an unacceptable risk. So that puts a little more documentation that you could really see that people went through a process to determine it. But again, I consulted with your county lobbyists, and they confirmed that these are not moving anywhere, sitting in first committees typically, but we'll just keep a track just in case. I always like to keep you informed on those. Move to the next slide. House Bill 421 and Senate Bill 1876, referred to as a relief from burdens on real property, but typically referred to as a Burt J. Harris Act amendment. And this is an amendment to an ongoing law that's been around for over 2 decades that would allow a property owner, the current law allows a property owner to sue a local government if they believe how a certain land use decision or permitting decision applied to their specific property inordinately burdens them compared to their neighbor. This amendment proposes to expand that, and you don't have to wait for a permitting decision or a land use decision or a zoning decision to challenge it on your property. You can, once the law is passed by a local government, it can be challenged right away, claiming it might be a burden on their property in the future. So that really expands when people could sue local governments. So we're definitely tracking this one closely to see if it passes. It's already passed in 2 committees on the House side, 2 committees on the Senate side, so they each have 1 to go. This one definitely has an ability to make it to the end of the session, which is only 15 days away. It also does expand the definition of property, includes subsurface rights and mineral rights. If people can allege those have been impacted, they might be able to pursue relief from local governments too. So we will be keeping an eye on that one. Less impact on environmental agencies, but still any local government should be a little concerned about that bill. Moving to the next slide, legal notices. This one is House Bill 35. It already passed the House and is moved over to the Senate for consideration. It's an opportunity to allow local governments to publish the notices that they typically have to put in newspaper, publish them on their own website in lieu of the newspaper, but also citizens would have the opportunity to have those notices mailed to them or emailed to them. So it could be a substantial cost savings for governments that do put a lot in the paper. EPC doesn't put many notices in the paper because we're not required to, but I know a lot of other governments do. So this could be a cost savings for those governments. And that's the last slide I have here, but looking at some bills yesterday, I thought it was worth informing you of Senate Bill 1954, the resiliency bill. That has passed both houses now, and it is going to be an opportunity for local governments to apply to the DEP for money, pass-through monies for vulnerability assessments. I always have trouble saying that word, and projects to deal with resiliency issues. So that's good news. It hasn't been funded yet, but at least the bills were created to create a trust fund and to have DEP be the one that would help funnel monies to local governments for vulnerability and projects of the sort. And the second bill, Senate Bill 2512, a documentary stamp tax bill, has created funding, $111 million, for septic tank connections and septic tank upgrades and to handle flooding issues. And that's it would be a 50% match with local governments administered through the DEP. But two good bills that I wanted to note that could allow some monies to flow to local governments for resiliency and for septic tanks.
Thank you, and thank you for adding those two.
Yeah.
Those are very interesting to us, and thank you for such a succinct presentation of these important pieces of legislation that are on our radar.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And seeing no questions from commissioners, we'll move right on to the director's report. Ms. Doherty.
Thank you, commissioners. And before I begin my remarks on the executive director report, I'll let you know next month at our May 20th meeting, we will be having the vulnerability assessment will be brought forward to you. Around the beginning of my career in 2015, the Planning Commission, the County Administration, and EPC had a meeting. There was a Peril of Flood Act. This was created under Governor Scott, and it required all local governments to have a vulnerability assessment. There was an article, I think if everybody remembers, I don't remember if it was the Washington Post or the Washington Journal, talking about vulnerability issues in this county. Well, that's going to come to you at the next EPC meeting. It couldn't come at a better time with this legislation moving forward, perhaps having some dollars to be able to help you with vulnerability issues. So I did want to let everybody know that. It's taken several years, but I want to tell you I've seen a prior presentation. It was done by USF, done very thoroughly, a lot of great science behind it. So we're looking forward to that presentation at this board meeting in May. So with that, I don't know if it's Chris or Elaine, if they could pull up my slides for the executive director report. I think it's HTV. There we go. Okay, next slide. There you go. Commissioners, EPC held the first basis of review workshop on March 31st. We had 2 workshops that day, one at noon and one around 6 o'clock. As a reminder, the purpose of this rule revision is to achieve consistency between EPC and other state and local government agencies, in addition to clarifying existing permitting programs. During the March workshop, staff received comments from the public and stakeholders regarding the whole lake treatment permitting program and proposed exemptions. Specifically, we received feedback which requested an exemption for permitting certain seawall repairs when they're damaged. The other exemption, the proposed exemptions will be included in the next published draft of the proposed rule. And our next workshop is scheduled, again, as I said, April 22nd at noon. All comments received are being considered by staff for future implementation into the proposed rule. Next slide, please. I wish to thank you for your support again, commissioners, especially again, Commissioner White, when you made the motion to use the BP oil spill trust funds to enable EPC to purchase the 2 boats to replace our older boats. I mean, they were put together with duct tape, and they had a lot of maintenance issues, and they couldn't have come more timely. Thanks again for this essential purchase, and I wanted to invite each of you and your staff. Commissioner White has been out on the boat before, not only to see the boats, but while the weather's nice, to go out for monitoring with us. We're doing a lot of it now, so but you don't have to go for the whole day. We could maybe make an abbreviated one for you, because I think Commissioner White went out for the full day, and it's a long day on the water. So we invite all you to do that, including your staff. Next slide, please. Air Division staff and I met with USF honor students Carter Nelson and Alexa Ray Clark. They are completing their senior year capstone project, which was investigating the use of artificial intelligence to improve traffic flow and reduce airborne pollution to low-income areas. And it's interesting because this was something Commissioner Overman was interested in. I think Commissioner Myers is interested in this as well. Staff discussed the EPC's role in regulating air quality in Hillsborough County, our continuous air monitoring network, long-term air quality data trends, as well as the significance of our near-road air monitoring program and mobile source emissions. I wanted to thank Reggie and Sterling and Jason for their well-informed presentation that day. Next slide. The USF Tampa Bay Science and Policy graduate students organized a panel of science and policy professionals, which included wetland manager Kim Tapley, to discuss riparian and freshwater environments. The panel discussions such as this facilitate student learning of how management, sustainability, and environmental policies and practice help protect our critically important environment in the Tampa Bay area. Thank you, Kim, for serving as a subject matter expert at this event. Next slide. The Hillsborough County Regional and Florida State STEM fairs were held online this year. I wish to thank our EPC volunteers that served as virtual judges. I know their assistance was greatly appreciated by students, parents, and fair organizers, and I want to give a special shout out to Kirsty Martinez and Dr. Dave Carlin for their involvement. Next slide. In order to provide exemplary customer service to the citizens of Hillsborough County, we believe all staff should understand the functions of the other departments within our agency. As a part of this effort, our second quarterly internal staff training was held in February. The session focused on the various functions and responsibilities performed by the Air Division. Next slide. There's still some time to register for the membership with the Greater Tampa Solar Co-op. It's free to join with no obligations to purchase solar. I was part of the first co-op in Hillsborough County. Tom Fass and some others put solar on their house, but there's no obligation to join. They're accepting new members, and they've extended the deadline to May 28th. Next slide, please. April 5th kicked off the inauguration of the Florida Food Waste Prevention Week. EPC partnered with the organizations and government agencies across the state to raise public awareness and to motivate Floridians to prevent food waste. This not only saves them money, but saves food resources, which benefits the environment and helps to end hunger. Next slide. Staff additionally realizes that times are tough for many families that have been adversely affected by the COVID state of emergency. I am proud of our 38 EPC staff that volunteered to help Feeding Tampa Bay in order to assist families in need. And I would like to give a special shout out to Gabby Nataline and the Philanthropic Committee for organizing this event. Thanks so much. Next slide, please. The Hillsborough 100 Conservation Challenge kicks off on April 17th, while Earth Day marks the inaugural Great Port event cleanup. EPC is a proud supporter of conservation and cleanup initiatives such as these. EPC is also taking the opportunity during Hillsborough 100 to remind everyone to get out and explore, enjoy, and celebrate the local natural wonders we work hard to protect. We wish great success for both events. Next slide. EPC is hosting several virtual events in May. Wetlands staff is conducting their annual Wetlands Tour series, and Air staff will be celebrating Clean Air Month by offering the public an Environment of Champions Selfie Challenge and announcing the student winners of the annual Environmental Photography Contest. Next slide, please. And with that, Commissioners, that concludes our presentation, or my presentation today, and turn it back over to you, Chairman Smith.
Thank you. Another great presentation. Thank you very much for updating us on all those events that are coming. Any questions or comments from board members or ideas for future agenda items? Now would be the moment for that, but seeing none, we will adjourn the meeting, and thanks to everyone. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioners. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
So long, everyone.